Hey everybody, so in this series of videos I'm talking about 14 layers of strategy as applied to river flows in U. And in general on this channel, hope to empower you guys to advance with maximum efficiency, quality, and independence at the piano through strategy. And as I've said numerous times in these videos, typically I talk about layering dozens or even hundreds of layers of strategy and mindset on top of each other in my teaching. These are just 14 arbitrary layers. They could have been in a different order, could have been different layers. There's many more layers than this, but it's just an extended example of one way you can start to apply a concept in your playing to help you, and then on top of that, do another concept, and then on top of that, do another concept. The idea being that they're all independent multipliers and all independently really good ideas to utilize. So why would you not use them all together and then continue to add more on top of them if you can do it in an elegant way rather than just, the alternative being that you just use them in isolation, missing out on the benefits of all of these other extremely helpful, important methods. Some of them literally like being how the brain works or how we learn. So yeah, layers that we've gone through so far, we're actually on layer 10 at this point actually. We've got 9 so far, and let's see here. So we've got separate hands, this idea of, doing to quality, right? Just, it has to be very good. Don't misread the notes also. Go as slow as you need to, although I'm kind of demonstrating more normal speed a fair amount of the time. But sometimes I'm doing slow as well, just to kind of show you what it would be like as a student. We're starting from super small sections. We always have an overlapping note at the end of each section. In my logical methodology, as I've said many times, a set is just any section plus the following note. One measure sets one measure plus the following note. Half measure sets half a measure plus the following note. A quarter measure sets a quarter of a measure plus the following note. So that is what sets are, and that basically always accounts for that overlapping note layer or requirement. All of the fingering is always written beforehand. We go through spaced repetition instead of doing things over and over again. We move on from things, come back. Every time we relearn, things are strengthening in our long-term memories because of the effort of retrieval, cognitive effort from the brain. Keeping track using my logical notation and my methodology. We are adding in reverse. If you mess up, you play something, you mess up, play something, you mess up, you should go to the very end, practice just the end, then add a little bit more, middle to the end. Slightly before the middle to the end, from the beginning to the end, right? And instead of starting from the beginning, playing the beginning right and then doing the ending wrong over and over again. Rule of expansion that I covered 2 videos before was this idea of if you have 2 adjacent sets of the same size next to each other, like 2 half measure sets, you must increase to a 1 the next time around. If you have 2 1s, you must increase to a 2 the next time around. There's no downside to this. You can watch that video for the specifics. And then last time I covered the rule of transition, which is this idea of if you're going from both hands into, or separate hands into both hands, you must do so at least a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning if you did 1 measure separate hand sets, the next pass through you should do like half measure both hand sets. If you did 2 measure separate hand sets rather, next pass through you should do 1 measure both hand sets, because both hands are just that much harder. You want to allow yourself a little bit of leeway here. And anyway, so that's kind of what we've covered so far. And this time, I don't actually have a very special name for this. I purposely was using what I thought wasn't the optimal strategy last time, just kind of being a little bit sneaky. And in terms of solving those both hand sets, and I'm just gonna call it adding in reverse for both hands. And I actually remember, I've taught at least 2 students recently that they start to get a little bit confused about this concept in relation to this one, in relation to starting with like smalls. So I think it'll be helpful just to show you a more extended example of hypothetical practice. Now, the idea of adding in reverse for both hands is pretty simple. It's the idea that we're adding in reverse, but we do separate and then both for each step. So the way that we solve things is distinct from kind of, how do I put it? if we do quarter measure sets through a given area, and the next time through we do half measure sets, the next time through we do one measure sets, the next time through we do two measure sets, right? That's basically this rule of expansion. That is distinct from this adding in reverse rule, which is the way that you solve any kind of separate hand sets. That's also distinct from this adding in reverse for both hands rule, which is like the way that you solve both hand sets. And I think I'll try to give an example here. So maybe I'll just explain it conceptually first, and then I can give an idea of hypothetical practice. So I'll actually expand this even a little bit more. So if I go through this new section here, for instance, let's say that I want to do let's just demonstrate the law of, or the rule of expansion, right? So maybe I'm just doing like half measure right hand sets. Let's just do this. Yeah, this is already plenty. Let's assume that the left hand, I'm also doing the same thing. I'll just do it super messy for sake of time. So these are all half measure set markers. So if I were to do this, and we're just talking about the rule of expansion, it's just that the next time through, I would erase all these half measure set markers and then do ones, right? And I'm not going to literally do that now for sake of time. But basically, I would end up doing one measure separate hand sets through all of these measures. Then the next time through, I would end up doing like two measure separate hand sets through all these measures. So that's very simple in terms of rule of expansion. If we account for now the adding in reverse idea, when I solved the one, right, because the previous time I had these half measure set markers, like I had these. So when I constructed the half measure sets into ones, when I combined them into ones, I used the adding in reverse principle. Like I played maybe from here to here, here to here, here, right? This doesn't mean I downgraded, even though I did the last quarter, last half, last three quarters, etc. All I did was add in reverse something, like in this case quarters, in order to solve the one, right? So now these halves are combined into a one. So the way that I am solving the one measure sets is adding in reverse, right? Part of it is that I'd already solved the halves the previous time, so it's much easier to carry out this process. But the way that I'm solving the one measure sets is still going to be adding in reverse, and it could be quarters that I'm adding in reverse, right? So I could use this strategy to solve each of these one measure sets. So to combine the half measure sets into ones, it may be that I'm adding in reverse quarter measure sets in order to solve each of the ones here. So I know that's kind of a mouthful. Hopefully as I do like a little bit of an example in a bit, it'll make it even more clear. So it's the same kind of thing with this adding in reverse for both hands. So, and I honestly suspect that in order to eliminate kind of like all confusions, this would probably be like a 1 to 2 hour long video. So we'll leave it at that, but feel free to ask if you have questions in terms of this general idea so far. So in terms of the adding in reverse for both hands, maybe I'll just try to just start going into the example here. I will say that just like the example I just showed, right? You had half measure separate hand sets. Now you're doing one measure separate hand sets. You add in reverse in order to solve them, right? The next thing we could do is do half measure both hand sets by the rule of transition, right? We just did one measure separate hand. Now we can do half measure both hand sets. The way to do those, it might be adding quarter measure sets in reverse, separate and then both. So that maybe I'll try to explain now using like this actual example. So let's go ahead and let's actually downgrade this again. So we have these ones here. I notice in teaching also that like the explanation I gave so far, there are some students I could have said just like a very tiny bit of that and they already got it. Others I said all of that and they're still glassy-eyed, they don't know exactly. So, you know, so that's why I think it's important to go over examples in many cases as well too. So in terms of this one, we did the one measure separate hand sets already. We're wanting to solve the half measure both hand set. I kind of showed you guys a little bit of the strategy last time. The default strategy though is this whole idea of adding in reverse separate them both for each step. I've actually shown this many times on the channel, but here I want to say it even more pointedly. So our goal is to go from triangle to triangle here, right? We did one measure separate hand sets already. We're trying to do a half measure both hand set now because of the rule of transition. And in order to solve this two measure or this half measure both hand set, we're going to add quarters in reverse, which normally would go like this. We would do like the last quarter, then we would do the entire thing. But instead, that might not be enough for a lot of students. It's actually going to be a 6-step process. We'll do the last quarter right hand alone, and then left hand alone, and then both, and then we'll do the entire half measure set, right hand alone, then left hand alone, and then both. So demonstrating each of those steps, first we have this right hand on its own. So we got this, I'm just going to make this larger now. Right? And then we have, let's see, this part, that left hand part. Then we have both hands, right? I guess I can, this designates both hands. Okay. And then we have right hand, the entire half measure set. Left hand. And then finally, right? So we have that entire thing. So that's kind of an elaborate process. Once you do this, it might be okay to just do and then the entire thing. That might be possible, or you might go through the entire 6-step process again. But that is the way of solving both hand sets by default. Adding in reverse, separate them both for each one. So going back to that kind of extended explanation from earlier, it doesn't mean that you're downgrading. It doesn't mean that you're like going backwards and going back to separate hand. So, like, you usually will never backtrack. Like, for instance, in this piece, maybe we did half measure separate hand sets, then we did one measure separate hand sets, then we did half measure both hand sets, right? Which is what we're doing right now. When you solve them, like in this half measure both hand sets just now, when we did the 3 green things and the 3 blue things, that 6-step process, that wasn't a downgrade. That was just a way of solving the half measure both hand set, right? We already solved the half measure separate hand sets a while ago. We solved the one measure separate hand sets the time before this. Now we're doing the half measure both hand set. The fact you went through this whole process, not a downgrade, just the way of solving. And if we are successful, then again we would erase these and then write in a half, because those are the both hand set markers here. That shows us we played from here to here correctly. And then we might solve the next one. So just very briefly, this process would be right hand alone, left hand alone, both, this last quarter measure set, and then the whole thing, right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both. And just to demonstrate that, we got this right hand alone, left hand just has this single note over here, and then we've got, right? Probably don't really need the camera, but just since I have it here, then I got this green. And then we've got this next one. And then we have both. Right? So that would be the process of doing that. Then we mark the next one. This is the default strategy for solving both hand sets. It could be adding smaller things than that. It could be that you're adding like 8th measure sets, in reverse, separate them both. It could be that you're skipping the separate sometimes, but it's a very thorough strategy. So that's what I would advise. Lots of other videos, like the Fur-Elise ones, I have all 3 parts on there. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of examples there. So in terms of these concepts here, just really briefly, of course, we started the process with separate hands. We did it to quality. We were observant. We didn't misread notes. And you go as slow as you need to, even though I'm demonstrating kind of normal speed most of the time, just for sake of time. Starting super small, and we're continuing to do that. We always have an overlapping note because of sets in my logical methodology. Always read all the fingering. Spaced repetition, we're moving on and then coming back, right? Instead of just doing things over and over again, every pass through, we're increasing the size or complexity. We're keeping track of everything using my logical notation. I showed you adding in reverse, starting from the ends of things and then going gradually back to the beginning. We always want to increase to the next size, half measure sets into ones, ones into twos, or in terms of complexity, like going from separate into both hands the following time. Even if you forgot everything, we always want to expand the following time. Transition, at least a 2-to-1 ratio when you're transitioning from separate hand sets into both hand sets in terms of their size. And finally, I showed you specifically adding in reverse for both hands, which is basically adding in reverse, separate, and then both for each step. Separate, then both for each step. So yeah, so that's kind of a mouthful. I think this was probably a longer one. But hopefully that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, thoughts. Please like and subscribe. Tell people about the channel. Let me know your thoughts. And looking forward to going over the rest of these layers with you guys.